"Excuse me, sir." The ballroom didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet the way a fire dies, slowly, then all at once. Because the girl standing in the center of the room was 6 years old, wearing a red dress 2 sizes too formal for her age, and she was pointing directly at the man every other person in the room had spent the evening carefully avoiding. She tilted her head, studied his face the way a scientist studies a specimen, without fear, without apology, with nothing but calm and focused curiosity, then said, still as still water, "Why do you have the same eyes as me?" Across the grand hall, a champagne glass slipped from her mother's fingers. She didn't hear it hit the tray. She was already moving. Because 6 years of running, 6 years of hiding, 6 years of building a life from nothing had just been undone by a curious little girl in a red dress. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a woman's entire carefully constructed world begins to come apart at the seams, stay right here, because this story is about to show you exactly that. And if you're new here, welcome. Hit that like button before we go any further, because you are going to want to share this one before it's over. Her name is Joanna Reeves, 30 years old, senior litigation attorney at one of Seoul's most demanding international law firms, the kind of woman who walks into courtrooms that weren't designed with her in mind and wins anyway. She had been doing that her entire career, walking into rooms that weren't expecting her, and making sure they remembered she had been there. She moved to Seoul 8 months ago for a case that was supposed to last 90 days. It has lasted longer. She tells herself it's the work, the clients, the opportunity. Seoul's legal landscape is evolving faster than almost any other city in Asia, and her firm needed someone who could match that pace and stay ahead of it. She is someone who can do that. She has spent the past 6 years making absolutely certain of it. She does not let herself think about the other reason she stayed. Her daughter's name is Lila Reeves. She is 6 years old, has skipped 2 grade levels, and reads people the way most children read picture books, easily, instinctively, and without mercy. She has her mother's stillness under pressure. She has her mother's eye for the detail that other people walk right past. She has a habit of gathering information behind a perfectly calm face and storing it quietly until the moment it becomes useful. Lila does not rush. Lila does not react. Lila observes. Joanna has raised her alone, beautifully, fiercely, without extended complaint and without detailed explanation, because in Joanna's experience, those 2 things mostly just slow you down when you have somewhere to be. She has one rule that Lila has always known without being told directly. We don't ask about your father. Lila has never asked until tonight. On the other side of the ballroom, Dee, the man her daughter has just walked up to and addressed directly, stands with the particular kind of stillness that develops in people who have spent long enough at the center of things to stop being moved by the noise at the edges. His name is Kang Jae-min, 32 years old, the heir to one of Korea's oldest and most significant industrial empires. That is what the public record says. What the public record doesn't say, what is instead communicated through reputation and through the way certain rooms rearrange their energy when he enters, is that Jaemin's influence extends into areas that don't appear in annual reports or charitable foundation newsletters. He is the kind of man whose name, said at the wrong table, causes other powerful men to set down their drinks and choose their next words with considerable care. He does not attend charity galas because he believes in the cause. He attends them because presence is its own form of communication. People see him. They remember. They calculate what they owe and to whom. The whole ritual takes about 40 minutes, after which he disappears before the speeches begin, because the speeches are never for people like him. Tonight he has been here 37 minutes. He is 3 minutes away from leaving. Then a small hand taps his arm. He looks down. And something inside him, something that has not moved in 6 years, goes completely still. To understand what is happening in this ballroom and why a champagne glass just slipped out of one of Seoul's sharpest legal minds' hands, you have to go back. 6 years ago, Joanna Reeves was 24 years old, a first-year international law intern, sharp enough that her placement at a firm which did not take interns was not a favor extended out of goodwill. It was an acknowledgement of something they recognized in her and couldn't afford to turn away. She had earned her way into every room she had ever occupied. She intended to keep doing that for the rest of her professional life. She had been in Seoul for 3 weeks when Kang Jae-min walked into the office on a Tuesday morning for what was logged in the system as a standard contract dispute. He was quiet, controlled, the kind of man who never raises his voice because it has never been necessary. The room already knows to listen. He moved through spaces with the kind of ease that you can't purchase or perform. It either develops in you over time or it doesn't, and in him it had. When Joanna had been assigned as junior support for the session, her job was straightforward: take notes, stay in the background, learn how the senior attorneys handled clients at this level. She corrected his attorney's clause in the first 10 minutes, not loudly, without ceremony. She slid a single note across the table during a pause in the discussion, flagged the specific section, and returned her attention to her notepad. The attorney read it. Jae-min read it. Then Jae-min looked at her for the first time, really looked, the way he would look at something that had just surprised him in a way he found interesting. "You're not just taking notes." "You're right," she said, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "I'm also fixing them." He smiled, just slightly. The expression of someone who has just passed through a door they didn't expect to find open. That was the beginning. What followed was slow and careful, in the way that things are slow and careful when neither person is willing to admit what is actually happening. They kept finding professional reasons to be in the same space. The reasons got thinner over time. Eventually, the reasons stopped mattering entirely because the conversation was the thing, not the pretense of the contract or the document or the review. Late evenings in the office when the other attorneys had long since gone home. Arguments that started about legal strategy and ended up somewhere neither of them had planned to go. Silences that were comfortable in a way that Joanna couldn't explain to herself and eventually stopped trying to. She knew what he was. She was not naive and she was not new to the world. The firm whispered about him the way all firms whispered about clients who occupied certain categories of influence, carefully and only among themselves, and never anywhere near a record. She had done her own research. She understood what she was dealing with. She told herself she was maintaining a professional distance. She was not maintaining a professional distance. He never took her anywhere that could be easily photographed. She told herself, at the time, that this was simply discretion, that a man in his position was necessarily careful about his public movements, and that she was being included in that caution rather than hidden by it. She told herself a number of things during that period of her life. She was later able to identify most of them as the kind of stories a person tells themselves when the truth is something they're not quite ready to look at directly. What she could not argue with, even in retrospect, even on her worst days, was this. Jae-min was the only person she had encountered who treated her mind as the most interesting thing in the room. Not her appearance, not her background, not the quiet question, the one she had learned to detect in rooms like the ones they occupied together, of what she was doing there or whether she truly deserved to be. He looked at the way she thought, the speed of it, the precision, the way she moved through a problem like she had already seen it from 3 sides before she said a word. He found it genuinely compelling, and he made no effort to conceal that he did. In a profession and a world that had spent a considerable amount of energy signaling to her how provisional her welcome was, how much she had to earn and re-earn and then earn again, that specific quality of attention felt like something close to oxygen. She had never needed it. She had told herself she had never needed it. But there is a difference between not needing something and never having had it, and she was old enough by then to understand that difference clearly. She hated how much it mattered to her. She had built herself carefully around not being that person, the person whose sense of themselves depended on how they were seen. She was not that person. And yet here she was. But there it was. He, for his part, was dealing with a problem he didn't have a name for and couldn't resolve by thinking harder about it, which was his default approach to most things. Jae-min had constructed his life around a particular kind of control. Not cruelty. He was not a cruel man, though he was capable of severity when it was called for. Not coldness, exactly. It was more the management of variables. Predictable inputs produced predictable outputs. Careful men built things that lasted. Reckless men built things that fell and took other things down with them. He had learned this early enough that it had stopped feeling like a lesson and simply become the shape of how he moved through the world. And yet here was this woman who made him choose his words before he used them, who made him sit with something before he said it out loud, who made him arrive at a meeting and notice with something between irritation and recognition, but that he was hoping it would run long. He had never hoped a meeting would run long in his life. He was 32 years old, and she was making him careful in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with strategy, which was the kind of careless he had no system for. He didn't know what to do with that. So he kept showing up, because it was the only answer he could find that didn't require him to stop. 4 months into the case, which had long since resolved, but which had produced 17 reasons for continued professional contact that both of them understood were not entirely professional, Joanna found out she was pregnant. It was a Tuesday. She still knows exactly what Light was doing in the room. She sat with that information for 2 weeks before she told anyone. Before she said a single word about it to another human being. She is not someone who processes by talking. She processes by thinking, by turning something over from every angle, by understanding it completely, by arriving at the conversation with her own position already established. When she was as ready as she was going to be, she told him. His reaction was not cruelty. She's been precise about this in her own thinking, because it matters. He did not become cold. He did not dismiss her. He did not say something that was designed to wound. What he did was worse than any of those things. He went silent, a silence that stretched long enough to be its own complete sentence, and then, quietly, carefully, as if he were reading from something written inside him long before this moment, "My family cannot know." Not, "I don't want this," not, "I don't want you," not even, "I don't know what to do." Just, "My family cannot know." And Joanna understood, in that moment, exactly where she stood. She understood what had been real, and what had been the story she'd told herself about what was real. She understood the difference between the man she had believed she was spending time with and the man who was actually sitting across from her. She nodded. She thanked him for his honesty, and she meant it in a cold and complete way, the way you thank someone for information that is painful, but clarifying. She had always preferred clarity to comfort. She had always believed that knowing the truth, even a difficult one, was better than living inside something that wasn't true. So she thanked him, and she meant it. She gathered her things from the desk she had occupied for 4 months. She did not make a scene. She did not raise her voice. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and the only thing that gave her away, the only thing, was that she walked out slightly faster than usual. She did not cry. Not there. Not in that building. Not in the elevator going down, or the street outside, or the taxi to her apartment. She cried exactly once that Friday night in the shower with the water running. Then she turned the water off, dried her face, started making a list. She was on a flight home by the following morning. He did not call. For the first several months on the harder days, she had constructed a version of events in which his silence was a form of protection, in which a man with his particular circumstances had done the only rational thing, and she was simply adult enough to understand the geometry of it, that it wasn't about her, not at the core, that he had made a calculation, and the calculation made sense, and she could hold that and still be fine. She stopped telling herself that eventually, not because it was painful, though it was, but because it wasn't true. And she had never been someone who could live inside a story that wasn't true, simply because the true one was harder to carry. She went home. She built a new structure around herself, slowly and methodically, the way you build anything that needs to last, one solid thing at a time, not rushing the foundation. She had Lila, and then she had Lila in the second sense, the deeper one. The moment when a child stops being a circumstance and becomes the fact that everything else organizes around. The thing that makes all the earlier confusion make sense, because it led here. She refused to fall apart. That last part took approximately 1 year to fully mean. Then, something inside her shifted, not dramatically, not with any announcement, just the way a tide changes, perceptibly, inevitably, without asking permission. She stopped spending energy on what hadn't happened and redirected all of it toward what was actually in front of her. Bar certification in 2 jurisdictions, pursued at the same time, because doing one thing at a time had never felt like enough. Junior partner before 30. They cases that other attorneys in her firm declined because the probability of success was uncertain and the probability of difficulty was guaranteed. She took those cases because she had learned that she was better when the margin for error was small. She won more of them than she lost. She did not make a performance of any of it. She simply did the work, and then she did more of it. And over time, the work accumulated into something that had a shape. She became exactly who she had always been going to become. She just did it without him, which turned out to be something she was entirely capable of doing. She noted this once in the journal she kept irregularly, not with bitterness, not with triumph, simply as a fact worth recording. Lila grew up inside the orbit of a woman who did not complain, did not over-explain. He did not perform resilience for anyone's benefit, and did not stop. She absorbed every part of it, the patience, the stillness, the quality of attention that Joanna brought to anything that mattered, which was most things in Joanna's view. Lila is, in many respects, her mother made smaller and more concentrated, everything turned up by a degree. She also has her father's eyes, their exact shape, their shade, the way they settle on something with full and complete attention, making whatever they're looking at feel like the only thing in the room worth looking at. Joanna notices this on certain days. She looks at her daughter for just a moment, registers it, does not name it, and then she looks away and goes back to what she was doing. There is no use in what she feels about those eyes. There's only Lila. And Lila is more than enough reason to keep going. Lila Clark Reeves does not behave like a 6-year-old. She is not rude. She's not performatively precocious in the way that some children are, the kind that want you to notice how advanced they are. She is something quieter and more genuinely unsettling than that. She is accurate. On the elevator ride up to tonight's event, she stood beside her mother and said without preamble, "You've checked your earrings 4 times since we left the room. You're not worried about the earrings." Joanna straightened her clutch. Observation noted. Conversation closed. Lila nodded. Filed it under whatever she files things under. She is always filing things. Joanna was at the gala for a client. An appearance. On a 1 of a dozen she made each month as part of the professional fabric of her work in this city. 2 hours, maximum. She would make the contact that needed to be made, be seen by the people who needed to see her, and be back in the apartment before Lila's usual reading hour. She had attended 6 events in Seoul over the past 8 months. She had not encountered Kang Jae-min at any of them. She had interpreted this as evidence that the city was large enough to contain them both without contact. She was wrong. She was reading through an event program card when she registered the specific quality of the air beside her, the particular warmth that meant Lila was standing there, and found it missing. She looked to her left. Lila was not there. She looked up, and across the width of the ballroom, past all the guests in the warm amber light and the sound of the string quartet, her daughter was standing directly in front of Kang Jae-min, pointing at his face. Joanna moved. She was already too late. "Why do you have the same eyes as me?" Jae-min blinked. He looked down, and then he looked closer, in the way of someone who cannot quite believe what they are looking at, but cannot look away either. The girl in front of him had a puff of natural hair pulled back with a small clip, a red dress with a bow at the waist, and the most still expression he had ever encountered on a child. She was not fidgeting. She was not performing. She was simply looking at him the way she would look at anything that required understanding, patiently, completely, without any hurry. He looked at her eyes, his eyes, exactly his eyes, with the shape of them, the particular shade, the quality of steadiness they contained, the thing he had looked at in the mirror every morning for 32 years and never been able to fully articulate to anyone who hadn't simply seen it. He understood in the space of 3 seconds what he was looking at. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "Lila," she said. "What's yours?" Before he could answer, a hand came down firmly on Lila's shoulder. He looked up, and 6 years collapsed between them like they had never existed at all. Joanna's voice when she spoke was controlled. It cost her everything she had in that moment to make it controlled. "Lila, come with me, now." "Mom, I was having a conversation." "Lila," Jamin straightened to his full height. But he was looking at Joanna the same way he had looked at her the first morning she corrected that clause, like she was something he was only beginning to understand, something that kept revealing new dimensions the more attention he paid. Joanna. She did not look at him. She took her daughter's hand. That's my daughter. The words were quiet and certain, not an accusation, not a question, the sound of a man arriving at something true that he should have arrived at a long time ago. She's my daughter, Joanna said just as quietly. You made sure of that when you made your choice. She walked away. He let her go. For now. In the elevator on the way down, Lila looked up at her mother. He seemed surprised. Lila. He also seemed sad, in a real way, not a polite way. And I think he's going to find us. Joanna kept her eyes on the elevator doors. You don't know that? Mom, a short pause. He saw your conference badge. He knows the hotel. Joanna closed her eyes. Should I not have told him my name? Lila asked with the genuine interest of someone trying to improve their methodology for next time. Lila. That's a yes. He did not send anyone. He came himself. The following morning, Joanna stepped out of the hotel elevator and he was already in the lobby, standing near the windows, jacket on, no coffee, no phone. Just waiting. He stood when he saw her. Old reflex. She had noticed it about him years ago and had never mentioned it. He always stood. She stopped 4 feet away from him. You have 10 minutes, she said. He nodded. He didn't use 10 minutes, and he used just under 2. I was wrong. I knew it at the time, and I handled it without courage. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I haven't earned the right to ask for that yet, and I know it. What I'm asking for is the chance to know her. A pause. From behind Joanna's arm, a small, precise voice. I have thoughts about this process. Both adults looked down. Lila was holding a notebook she had acquired from somewhere. The hotel front desk, it would later emerge. She had also accepted 2 complimentary pens. I made a list of questions, she said, holding up the notebook. Interview format, for vetting purposes. It seemed like the correct next step given the circumstances. Joanna looked at her daughter. Where exactly did you... Front desk, Lila said. They were very helpful. Should we find somewhere to sit? This could take a while. The vetting took place in the hotel restaurant over breakfast, during which Lila worked through her notebook with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been planning this for longer than was strictly possible given the timeline, but which somehow felt inevitable anyway. Her questions, read from the notebook in order. What are your long-term plans, professional and personal? Be specific. Do you have a temper? Rate it honestly, 1 to 10. Mom, please don't make that face. It affects the data. Have you ever lied to someone in order to protect yourself rather than protect them? And what happened? That last question settled into the air differently than the others. Jamin was quiet, not the pause of a man calculating. The pause of a man who has just been asked something that found exactly where it was aimed. Yes, he said, and I lost everything I didn't know I had. Lila wrote in her notebook for a moment. Honest, she said without looking up. Self-aware. The delay was real. Real delays have a different quality than performed ones. The eyes go inward. She looked up. I'll allow continued contact. Provisionally. There will be additional assessments at intervals. Joanna put her forehead briefly in her hand. She's 6, she said quietly. I skipped 2 grades, Lila pointed out. The emotional intelligence came with. He didn't rush anything after that. He seemed to understand almost immediately that speed was not a currency Lila accepted. She would simply log it and adjust her assessment accordingly. Mouth, he had been observed and categorized. He was now operating under evaluation conditions. He approached this with a seriousness that Joanna noticed was not performed. He was actually thinking about it. The following Saturday, he took them to a large, quiet bookstore near Gyeongbokgung that Lila had. It emerged, already researched and selected. She had found it online the morning after the vetting breakfast. She had noted the section layout, the operating hours, and the fact that it carried a Korean translation of a mathematics text she had been looking for. She shared none of this in advance, simply told Jamin the name of the bookstore when he asked where she would like to go. He had hired a car. He did not make a production of it. He simply arrived at the hotel lobby at the agreed time and held the door. At the bookstore, Lila went directly to the science section with the efficiency of someone who had already planned the route. She worked her way through the shelves methodically, pulling books, reading the first page or two, making small sounds of assessment that were not quite words, returning the ones that didn't meet whatever criteria she was applying. Jamin stood a few feet away. He did not hurry her. He did not check his phone. He did not make conversation with Joanna in the bright, effortful way of someone trying too hard to demonstrate that they were comfortable. He simply stood there and let Lila work. At one point, Lila held up a book without looking at him and said, "Does your company do anything with material science?" "Some," he said. "Then you should read this." She handed it to him. He took it. He read the back. He put it under his arm. He bought it. Joanna watched him buy it along with the mathematics text Lila had found, and she stood quietly by the door and said nothing. Lila noticed he had not checked his phone. She did not say this out loud, but Joanna saw her make a small note when she thought no one was watching. Several days after that, a bag of food arrived at Joanna's office at 8:40 in the evening, while she was still at her desk working through a case that had extended well past any reasonable hour. A note was folded on top of the bag, written on plain paper in careful handwriting. She read it, set it aside, picked it up again, read it a second time, slower. From the small sofa in the corner of her office, the one that had become, over the past 8 months, Lila's unofficial second home during late work evenings. She did her homework there, read there, occasionally fell asleep there and had to be carried to the car. A thoughtful voice emerged. His handwriting. The first few lines are controlled, but the last line got messier. Please stop analyzing his handwriting. I'm noting that he was nervous when he wrote it, which means the content was important to him, not just the gesture. A pause. You should keep the note, Mom. Joanna kept the note. She folded it once and put it in the inside pocket of her bag, where she would not have to explain it to anyone. Lila already knew she had kept it. She always knew. His family found out through a photograph, not through any introduction, not through any conversation Jamin had chosen to have. Someone at the bookstore had taken a picture, the tall man in the dark coat standing patiently in the science aisle, while a very small girl delivered what appeared to be a comprehensive lecture, and it had found its way into a gossip column that used the words "mystery child" twice in the headline and filled the rest with implication. The Kang family called a meeting that Jamin was summoned to, not invited to attend. The words used in that meeting: inappropriate, liability, complication, optics. What lived underneath those words was less measured. She was a foreigner. She was black. The child was already 6 years old, already a complete person, already someone who existed well outside everything the family had planned and arranged and expected. Jamin sat through the entire meeting. When it was done, Lenny said, "Finished?" "Jamin, I asked if you were finished." Silence. "I have a daughter. She's extraordinary. Her mother's extraordinary. What happens next is not a family decision." He left the room. What followed was not gentle. Jamin's mother was a woman who had navigated the upper levels of Korean society for 40 years and who understood that carefully applied pressure produces results. Joanna's firm received 2 unusual inquiries that week. A contact in Seoul who had been consistently responsive went quiet. Small things, individually explainable. Together, a pattern. Joanna recognized the pattern immediately because she reads patterns professionally. She did not consider packing her things. She did not think about the airport. She drafted 4 legal responses, filed 2 through the firm, then sent the remaining 2 as formal letters under her own name with her signature in ink at the bottom. Then she went back to her case. Jamin found out 3 days later. He appeared in her office doorway. She had not invited him, but she had not told reception to turn him away, which said something she wasn't ready to say directly. He stood there and looked at her across the office for a moment. "You didn't leave?" "No," she said, without looking up from what she was working on. "I don't do that anymore." He stood there another moment. "Thank you." She looked up at that. "I didn't do it for you." "I know." A pause. "That's why I'm thanking you." He left. She went back to her file. But she sat inside that exchange for a while after he was gone. Now, his family's formal statement, the one drafted to carefully distance Jamin from Joanna and the child without ever saying so directly, the kind of statement that corporate communications teams become expensive for, never published. Jamin stopped it before it could go anywhere. In its place, he arranged something he understood was a risk, a dinner. His family, Joanna, Lila, everyone in the same room at the same time, around one table, with no exit available that wasn't also an ending of some kind. He told Joanna what he was planning. He did not ask her permission. He asked if she was willing. There is a difference, and he was careful about it. The person he had been most uncertain about was his grandmother, Han Sunja. She had not attended the family meeting. She had not weighed in on any of the discussions. Though she had asked only one thing, once, in the 10 days since the photograph appeared. Bring the child to me. At the dinner table, Lila sat directly across from the family matriarch. Han Sunja studied her without speaking. She had the stillness of someone who has outlasted more than most people ever face, and she used it now the way she used everything, deliberately, without waste. Lila studied her right back, without flinching, without performing, without the anxious desire for approval that most children cannot fully suppress in front of an elder who has that much gravity in a room. The silence lasted long enough that the rest of the table, adults all, became noticeably uncomfortable. People reached for water glasses, someone adjusted a napkin. The two of them appeared completely unbothered by any of this. And then Han Sunja said something in Korean. Lila tilted her head and looked at Jaemin. What did she say? Jaemin cleared his throat. Something in his expression that was usually very managed had come slightly loose. She says you have the family eyes, and that anyone who argues with eyes is a fool. Lila thought about this for a moment. Then she nodded. I agree with her, she said. She seems very smart. Han Sunja, who had not laughed at a family dinner table in a length of time that those present did not want to calculate, laughed, a real one, from somewhere that hadn't been reached in a long while. The room shifted, not completely, not without the weight of everything that had been said in the preceding weeks, but it shifted. Or in the way that rooms shift when the person with the most authority in them makes a decision visible. Later that night, after Lila had fallen fully and deeply asleep in the back of the car on the drive back and had been transferred, thoroughly unconscious and faintly grumbling, into her hotel bed, Joanna stood on the small terrace outside their room. The city moved below her, steady and indifferent and alive, all those separate lights that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with why she had stayed. She heard the door behind her. She recognized the quality of his footsteps without turning around. She had forgotten that she knew them, and the fact that she still did was something she did not want to examine too closely tonight. Jaemin came to stand a few feet away. He did not try to close the distance. I know I don't get to ask for what I actually want, he said. You can ask, she said, looking at the city. Asking isn't the same as getting. A pause. She could feel him choosing words with the carefulness she had once noticed about him and then had to stop noticing. I want the chance to build something with you, with her, not to repair what I broke. I understand that's not a thing I'm owed, and I'm not asking for it. Just forward, from exactly where we are right now, not from where I wish we were. She looked at the lights. Lila will have ongoing questions, she said, for a long time, possibly forever. I know. She'll keep the notebook indefinitely. I assumed. There's a consistency column. She tracks whether people do what they say they're going to do. She's been tracking it since she was 4. A pause. She goes back and reviews old entries. Then I'll make sure my entries are worth reviewing. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not saying yes, she said, I know. I'm saying I'll think about forward. He nodded. Once, slowly, like a man who understands the weight of what he's been given and does not want to handle it carelessly. That's more than I gave you, he said. That's more than I earned. That's enough. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk back inside either. They stood there for a few minutes in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, the kind that means something precisely, because neither person is trying to push it in any direction. 3 days later, early morning. She's the sole apartment Joanna's firm had arranged for her extended stay, functional, well-lit, growing more like home than she had intended. Coffee on the counter, case files open on the table, the particular quiet that she had spent 6 years building herself into. Lila padded in from her room, settled at the table, opened her notebook. Mom? I added a new column to the evaluation. Joanna looked up. It's called, Does he look at you like you're the only thing in the room that matters? Lila said it with the same precise, unhurried tone she used for everything. A beat. And? Joanna asked in spite of herself. Lila looked up. I'm going to need more observation time. The sample size is still developing, but so far, she looked back at her notebook and made a small note. The data looks good. Joanna looked at her daughter. This child, this careful, thorough, extraordinary, occasionally alarming child. She opened her mouth. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Kang Jae-min. She looked at Lila. Lila was already writing. Without looking up, she said, Answer it, Mom. Avoidance is a pattern, not a strategy. Joanna exhaled. She picked up the phone, and for the first time in 6 years, she stopped running away from what was in front of her. If this story stayed with you, if Lila's notebook made you smile, if Joanna's quiet strength felt like something you recognized, subscribe to this channel. There is a new story here every week, and every single one of them is worth staying for. And if someone in your life needs to hear something like this today, send it to them. You never know whose morning it might change.